Members, we now come to the debate on Part 4, which is clauses 122 to 204 and Schedule 2A.
Yeah.
Grant Robertson.
Suddenly there's not so much enthusiasm to debate Part 4.
It's a peak listening time, though.
Yeah, that's right. It is drive time, as they say, Mr Chair, at 10 to, or quarter to 6. Mr Chair, obviously, I will make a very brief reference to Part 3 in the context of Part 4, because the decisions that have just been made in the House to pass the amended Part 3, which I believe to be wrong and a travesty in terms of what this bill could have been, have a consequence in Part 4, which is that in the absence of having workplace health and safety representatives in now a very large number of workplaces in New Zealand, whether or not it's 97%, 95%, 90%, it doesn't really matter. It's thousands of workplaces in New Zealand who now won't have elected workplace health and safety representatives, which is a bizarre situation, a dangerous situation created by a National Party hell-bent on rewarding the people who they think are their voters at the expense of New Zealanders' lives. This bill was meant to be about risk to workers, and it's turned into a bill about the National Party managing its political risk. And that is what has just happened in Part 3. But the consequence of that for Part 4, Mr Chair, is that those who are charged with inspecting workplaces now have a lot bigger job to do. Because in the absence of those representatives, there will be more call upon Department of Labour inspectors to find their way to workplaces. If we look at it this way, Mr Chair, there are a number, as Labour Party speakers have said throughout the debate, there are a number of changes and enhancements to workplace health and safety law here that we think are good. In order for them to be enforced, we will now require a greater level of activity among workplace inspectors. And if we look at, Mr Chair, if we look at clause, all of them, in fact, all of subpart 1 actually, Mr Chair, we're talking about taking the workplace inspectors taking on roles in places where we don't have workplace committees, where we don't have workplace health and safety representatives. They will be required, Mr Chair, to effectively take up the duties of those who would have undertaken those positions. Mr Chair, we know that the government, and I'm sure if Minister Woodhouse were here, he would, or in the chair rather, he would actually stand up and tell us, no, we've employed more workplace health and safety inspectors, and that would be numerically true. But it is nowhere near sufficient for New Zealanders to have confidence that this law that has been put in place today will actually be implemented. There is no point in National Party members standing up and going on about the obligations that there now are on employers, and then on the other hand not provide the enforcement mechanism to make sure those things are implemented. And we know, Mr Chair, that that is what's required. Time after time, when we see inquiries and court cases into workplace deaths, what we learn is that it's all very well to have rules, but they're not always followed. And we're not making laws, as Mr Scott would have had us know in his previous intervention, for the employers who are good employers. If we did that, we would have very few laws on our statute books about anything. We wouldn't have a Crimes Act because good people don't commit murder, so we don't need to have a crime against it. That's what happens here. That's why you need inspectors. That's why you need proper laws, is not for the good employers, but for the bad employers. And I'd venture to suggest, Mr Chair, that that's exactly what the inspectors required under Part 4 of this bill will actually be having to look at. Because good employers will create their own health and safety representatives and their own health and safety committees regardless of how many employees they have. It's the bad employers, it's the lax employers who have decided that they'll put profit above human life who are the ones that will be required for the inspectors to be appointed under Part 4. And unfortunately the Department of Labour, now part of the MB, is woefully understaffed when it comes to this kind of activity. incapable, in my view, of being able to ensure the full implementation of this law. So, Mr. Chair, I want to now look at clauses 123 through to 126. This is the question of improvement notices, and I think this is where we start to see the work that would need to be undertaken by
Chair.